Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. How artillery revolutionized European siege warfare? I bet it did, for sure. I'm very interested in learning about this. Hello, my name's Connor, Rhode Island, New England, USA, in that order. I like to learn things and do stuff. Let's go. Original link to the video, top of the description. If you are not ready to learn, there's the door. Home ec is down the hall.
At the end of the Middle Ages, a new weapon system changed the face of European siege warfare. Artillery made its appearance. It had an impressive impact, best shown by one peculiar fact. Imagine a walled fortress in the 14th century. It could easily deter attackers for several months. But in the early 15th, up to the early 16th century, after artillery had fully developed, the same walls fell within days.
So, gunpowder is a Chinese concoction, right? Or at least a part of it is a Chinese usage. So, how long ago the idea of using gunpowder as a weapon, like a cannon, artillery, to this point where it's actually used in siege warfare? I'm not sure how much time is in between then. I'd like to learn.
As a result, engineers had to construct much more elaborate defensive structures. By the early to mid-16th century, a fortress could again withstand a siege with heavy artillery for several months. In this video, we look specifically at the rise of artillery. If you'd like to know more on the general evolution of warfare, we recommend you have a look at the documentary The History of Weapons by today's sponsor CuriosityStream. CuriosityStream is home to thousands of streamable documentaries and non-fiction TV shows on topics like history, nature, science and more. The History of Weapons, for example, is great for anybody interested in warfare. It has 10 episodes covering the evolution of warfare across several thousand years. From the Roman gladius to the English longbow, to medieval artillery and the early modern musket, everything gets addressed.
It's cool.
CuriosityStream really offers a great deal. If you sign up using code SandroMan, you get unlimited access for just $14.99.
Make sure to use their code, it helps them out.
So go check that out. Let's now jump back to the rise of artillery. The historian Clifford J. Rogers explains that the importance of artillery changed drastically between the 1320s and the 1420s. Early on, artillery had no more power than traditional siege engines, but it also had a psychological impact. This loud and thundering weapon frightened whoever faced them. Of course, such a weapon became very popular with the war leaders and generals of the time. The first step in that development were cannons, which were used already quite early on. One primary source suggests that already in 1378, the English brought 400 guns to the siege of Saint-Malo. Most of these were probably hand cannons, not proper artillery, and they were used along with other traditional siege engines, such as trebuchets. Generally, in the early 14th century, guns were
I'm looking at the
Generally, in the early 14th century,
I was just looking at the thing that he was placing the gun on.
Guns were inexpensive and small compared to other siege equipment. But as the number of employed cannons increased, so did their size. Early cannons shot very small shot pellets of lead or iron. Then, within very short time, the size of projectiles increased immensely. As early as in 1378, the Count of Holland, Albert I, bought 400-pound stones for his grote donderbusse.
400-pound stones. And just look at that thing. It seems like it would be very inaccurate, right? Because it's such a short barrel, but it just looks like a beast.
His great blunderbuss. Such guns had drawbacks, which even their names bear witness to. Take for example the lazy mette, or the so-called faule Magd, which means lazy maiden. The two main disadvantages were that it was hard to move these big guns, and that it took a lot of time to reload them. Some of these immense cannons became pretty famous, such as the Pumhardt von Steyr. It was forged in about 1420, and is currently exhibited in Vienna. With a powder charge of 15 kilograms, this monstrosity could shoot an 80 centimeter ball weighing 1,500 pounds and had a range of about 6.
What?
It could shoot an.
Excuse me?
With a powder charge of 15 kilograms.
Okay, that's like 35 pounds of explosives.
This monstrosity could shoot an 80 centimeter ball weighing
80 centimeter.
weighing 1,500 pounds.
1,500.
And had a range of about 600 meters. The historian Volker Schmidtchen noted that besides being very loud and frightening, these guns didn't really achieve much more than their smaller counterparts. Regardless of their size, early cannons were more often used to shoot directly at a town rather than the walls. This demoralized the population quickly and gently persuaded them to surrender, which saved the attackers the trouble of putting their soldiers at risk in a head-on attack.
Just the idea that at any moment this giant boulder could just fall on your head. I don't care how fast it's going. If it's that heavy, it's going to do a lot of damage to whatever it hits.
On the flip side, if there was a head-on attack, guns could be used by the defenders too. At the Siege of Breteuil in 1356, for example, the besieged English managed to destroy a French assault tower with their artillery. It is worth noting...
that's such a crazy moment. Just to be like, hey guys, we're coming to attack. Just that moment where like you're right there. You're so close to fighting, but not quite, so you're still in talking distance.
Managed to destroy a French assault tower with their artillery. It is worth noting that the primary sources up to the 1420s usually report very long sieges, implying that artillery at the time could not simply shoot the walls to pieces. The sources indicate that the primary reason for surrender at the time was simply a lack of supplies. This changed around the middle of the 1420s. More and more primary sources state that garrisons surrendered not because of hunger, but because the enemy cannons had rendered their position indefensible. More and more primary sources state that garrisons surrendered not because of hunger, but because the enemy cannons had rendered their position indefensible.
Okay, so finally they're having an effect more than just
scaring. But artillery was no miracle cure, and there were still some exceptionally strong points that could resist this type of bombardment for months. In the 1429 siege of the castle of Torcy, for example, the English had to spend 6 months to starve out the defenders. In the end, it all depended on the respective strength of the siege train and the fortress. It was not until the 1430s that artillery could reliably batter down medieval fortresses. 1430s that artillery could reliably batter down medieval fortresses.
Okay, so 1320 to 1420, like they said, is kind of like the infancy stage where you're trying to figure stuff out, and it's not until 1430s where they're actually very useful in and of themselves.
Soon after, though, the sources show us that Burgundian artillery, arguably the best of its time, battered down walls within just days at Choisy in 1430. 3 years later, in 1433, at Avalon, it proved very effective again and shot large breaches into the wall and the gates. By the 1440s, the Franco-Burgundian artillery could destroy even the strongest fortresses. This profound development in how war was conducted has been called the Artillery Revolution by Clifford J. Rogers. But what exactly made the guns of the 1430s strong enough to demolish fortresses that had previously tilted warfare in favor of the defenders? Rogers provides 4 reasons.
Lengthening of the barrels.
When the barrels of the guns were lengthened, the amount of time which the pressure from the exploding gunpowder affected the ball increased significantly. Pressure from the exploding gunpowder. Barrels of the guns were lengthened. The amount of time which the pressure from the exploding gunpowder affected the ball increased significantly. This in turn boosted the muzzle velocity of the shot. In addition,
that makes sense. So it's saying that the longer that the force of the explosion was applying to the projectile, the further it would go, rather than just a short barrel where it's likely where half the explosion would probably be expensed, not really projecting the ball. So that makes sense.
Also allowed for more precise aiming. This meant that more balls could hit the same area. The lengthening of the barrel also made reloading much easier. Previously, a large bombard would have been loaded with gunpowder for much of its barrel length. Then, a wooden plug, cut precisely to fit the barrel, was put in the gun. The ball would then be put on top of this. To minimize pressure loss, straw was mixed with mud and put into the barrel to seal the load. Longer barrels, by contrast, generated pressure on the ball for longer, and thus, some of the techniques like the sealing with mud could be dispensed with. This improved the fire rate. Those longer barrels were made possible because of improvements in the way large guns were manufactured. Using a new method, guns were now built out of long staves. Earlier, they had been forged out of large iron plates into cylindrical shapes. Instead, staves were now placed around a cylindrical mandrel and then reinforced with bands of white-hot iron. These were hammered down the cylinder like the hoops of a barrel. The hoops shrank as they cooled, binding the staves tightly together. Guns became cheaper because of a metallurgic advancement in the 1420s. The addition of limestone to the flux during ore refinement made iron less expensive. This meant that more heat was needed to make the slag free running, but it also changed the structure of the slag from this chemical formula into this one.
2 iron, 1 oxygen.
Well, this means that the 2 atoms of iron, the 2 Fe, removed from each molecule of slag, were no longer wasted, thus making iron cheaper. Moreover, the manufacturing of cannons became more routine. Consequently, the price of services of cannonsmiths dropped starkly. Rogers reckons that the total price dropped about a third as a result of these changes. The last major change occurred around 1400. New and improved recipes for gunpowder began to appear, which came quite close to the ideal proportion of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. Essentially, gunsmiths and artillery specialists began to use corned powder instead of finely ground powder. Rogers explains, quote, "The structure of corned powder allowed the burning to progress mainly between, rather within powder grains, resulting in a much more rapid evolution of solid into gas." End quote. The corned powder had other advantages as well. If you're interested, have a look at our Rise of Gunpowder video. Paradoxically, however, gunners did not use these ideal proportions because the increase
I should check that out as well.
of the pressure in the barrel that would result from the ideal proportioned corned powder was likely to burst the cannon. Nevertheless, corned powder, even when used in unideal proportions, was still a major improvement compared to the fine powder. Later on, many other improvements followed. One thing is certain. From the 15th century onwards, cannons played a major role in siege warfare all over the world. Soon, the smartest engineers found methods to counter this new technology. The bastion fort, better known as Star Fortress, made its appearance, and turned the way sieges were conducted upside down once again. Like in the medieval period, it could again take months, in rare cases even years, to take a fortress, but this is a topic for another video.
Awesome video. So one of the bigger things I learned was that I knew that lengthening the barrel would increase accuracy, but it also increases the power as well. So doubly improvement right there. Awesome. Great video. I'll check out the gunpowder one as well. See you guys next time. I think I'm going to do a top 10 video. See ya.